Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we are going to be talking about Talk to Me, a brand new horror film from A24 that of course everybody's going to be excited for because it is an A24 horror film, but I've been excited for this movie even a lot longer before A24 even bought this movie because this is a film that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, a movie that was only available in the in-person film festival and I couldn't see it online, and so I've been dying to see this movie ever since I wasn't able to see it. I only saw the description and the photo of this movie back at the film festival and I was already obsessed with it at that time, and now that I finally seen this movie, of course that hype has been extremely warranted. This might be my favorite horror film of the year. I might need to rewatch Infinity Pool one more time to kind of decide which one I like more, but this is yet another great horror film and such a great past few years of the revitalization of the horror genre. And so this will of course be a spoiler review for Talk to Me, so if you've not had a chance to go check this one out in theaters this weekend, I would highly recommend you guys go check this one out because I think it is a very good mixture of like the general audience scares of something like Smile would be that came out last year, or something that's a little more thoughtful and more, unique and A24 like a film like Hereditary. But what is this movie about? Well, essentially it follows the main character Mia, who has a group of friends that have access to the severed hand of either a psychic or a medium, or even some of them theorize that it might be a severed hand of a Satanist. They don't really know exactly where this thing came from, but it essentially gives you access to the spirit world. When you hold this hand and you say talk to me, you see a spirit at random and this spirit will be let inside of you, and then you can now experience being possessed and have the memories of this thing, and you can have interactions with them for a very short amount of time. 90 seconds is what they think is the safest way to go about using this thing that they don't really know exactly how it works, but they know that it is really fun and entertaining to do when you're a bunch of kids at a party. And I honestly appreciate that the filmmakers never really hold your hand, no pun intended, through the process of explaining how things work in this movie. Things just kind of go the way that they do, and you can kind of assume why it latches itself onto Mia, why it does the things that it does, and why these spirits or this entity in general does the things that it does. It's all left to the audience. And honestly, the premise does feel a little bit similar to something like, Truth or Dare a few years ago, which of course that movie was not very successful. It was box office successful, but it wasn't successful critically because it was that type of thing where these kids were really annoying and they were playing this game and you didn't think like, why in the world would you play this game? It's really dumb to do this. But honestly, after watching this movie, I would totally play this Talk to Me game. I think I would join in with the friends, and it kind of divides this friend group into two different sides. There's a side that have the personality types that would want to play this game and have fun, being possessed by a demon for a very short amount of time in this really great montage of them, having fun with this thing. And there's also the other side of the group that is very much skeptical of this and doesn't want anything to do with it and is absolutely terrified of what it can mean for these characters and for their safety in general. And so you have this friend group be divided by this object that is really fun for some people and really terrifying for others, and it warrants a really fun and inventive horror film that has a lot of great moments. So like I said, the main character's name is Mia, played by Sophia Wilde, and this is a character who has just recently lost her mother, so her storyline is very much ingrained in the A24 type of thing, where it is very much about grief for this character, and, she's trying to bury herself in all these friend groups and all these parties, and she doesn't really want to be at home with her father because she's trying to push down all her emotions of why her mother had passed away, and she thinks she died from an accidental overdose on some pills, and the reality is that she actually did take her own life, and she just does not want to accept that fact. Even her father doesn't want to talk to her about it. He doesn't want to read this suicide note that she had that essentially explained why she did it and explained that she's finally hopeful for once after taking her own life, and she's hopeful that her family can move on without her, but she just doesn't want to deal with the ramifications of her mother's death. And so she's very much going to be the type of character that is going to hold this hand and say talk to me and let the spirit inside of her. And she's also going to be the type of character that's going to pressure the more innocent characters like her friend's younger brother to the exact same thing. And when she hears the voice of her mother from this kid, she becomes obsessed with it. She becomes manipulated by whatever this entity is that is controlling this entire situation, and she's going to go down an extremely dark path that is going to go throughout the entire movie in a very dark and sinister and terrifying way. Jade is the other lead of this movie, who is kind of the friend of Mia and also the older sister of Riley, who gets possessed by Mia's mother at the crux of the movie, and she's very much the type of character that wants nothing to do with this hand. She's a very overprotective sister over her brother, and she does not want him to try it whatsoever, whereas Mia is the one who is able to convince this kid to, do this thing that he probably shouldn't be doing. And she's kind of the level-headed one, where I can see some people finding her annoying for the first half of the movie because she's the unfun friend. She's the one that's kind of a little more uptight and doesn't want to have fun. But when it comes to being an older sister to this little kid who gets possessed and starts smashing his face into this table and then starts trying to kill himself in this absolutely terrifying scene where he's trying to grab his own eye out of his own head, and it's an absolutely bloody and gory and terrifying sequence It's easily the scariest scene in the entire movie, and it just is all, again, it's the inciting incident for the entire story for Mia to be manipulated by this entity to do all the things that she does later on in this film. But you start to feel for this character at that point in the movie, and this family, this sister and this younger brother and her mother, they do not deserve anything that happens to them in this story. And her being the level-headed one throughout the entire thing that also kind of gets tricked and manipulated to go back to the house and notice some other things that Mia did to her father and all the things that happens to her character later on in the film. I just don't think she deserved all of that, even though she was the unfun friend for the first act of this movie that feels like she's the uptight one that you don't really necessarily connect with at first, whereas by the end of the film, you really do feel bad for this family. There's also two other characters that I really do want to highlight about the first act of this movie that just had a really light and very fun presence in this movie, and that is the two kids who had access to this hand to begin with. And even though they're kind of the ones that caused the entire situation to go down, they don't really deal with any of the consequences of it because they just kind of show up in the movie, they give them the hand, they cause all this chaos, they're like the really fun type of characters who are all the ones running the parties and all that sort of thing, and they're just really entertaining to watch in that montage where they're messing around with the hand, and their personalities are just really drawing to the audience. And that by the end of the film, when things start to get really serious, they just kind of leave the movie and just have no consequences to them. And that's another thing that I actually appreciate about this film, is it doesn't go down the cliched route. Yes, they do cause this situation to happen, and in a movie like Truth or Dare, every single character that had anything to do with anything ends up dying in this movie by the fault of these sort of people. And since they just kind of leave the movie and just kind of leave without consequences, it says a lot about the entity itself, because it doesn't care about people like that. It doesn't care about the people that use this hand, and it's an easy way to help manipulate the person that it is going to abuse, because it's not hurting all these other people. The other people are genuinely having fun with this thing. And so it really does hone in on Mia's character, saying that you are going to be the targets of all of this suffering, and all these other people that are involved in this situation are going to get away with it, making more believable that she would fall for this in the first place. But let's get back to Mia's character and essentially why this entity wants to latch itself upon her, because she's the weakest one in this group. She's the one that's dealing with all this very dark and very stressful grief that she is facing throughout this entire movie, and it's latching itself upon her in a very unique way. It's not that cliched route where you have her be the character that gets possessed by this entity and is doing all these terrible things in like a very Evil Dead Rise type of way, which I think was what I was expecting this movie to go, but instead it's the kid who gets possessed in that really dark way that starts harming himself and having that really gruesome scene, and it's all in effect to essentially manipulate her to do all these terrible things at this point in the film, and it's using her as kind of a force in the real world to cause all of this harm. And she's the perfect candidate because she's seeing her mother, and her mother is able to essentially lie to her, saying that, oh, I didn't take those pills on purpose, your father is lying to you. When he reads out that suicide note, the spirit is kind of abusing her own emotions and using her as a force of evil, essentially. And I find that's entire storyline about grief and with her father, and that reading of the suicide note and all that stressful stuff that's happening, because you saw the opening scene of the movie of the brother stabbing the other brother and then stabbing himself in the face, and that really dark sequence where you see at the beginning of the movie, you can see that happening now to Mia's character, and you're absolutely terrified of her harming her father. You're absolutely terrified of her causing more harm to this family, for Jade's family, and you just see her going down this dark route. But what makes her character really interesting is the fact that she can try to push back against that. She can finally accept her mother's death. She can accept that suicide note and say, oh, I understand what has happened now. My mother wasn't happy, and I understand that, and I can finally let it go. And by the ending of the film, when she goes over to the hospital and takes Riley out on that wheelchair and almost pushes him into the highway with all these cars running back and forth, you get some flashes back to the kangaroo in the road that she saw earlier in the film, kind of representing this idea that she wasn't able to put the kangaroo out of its misery. She's not mentally capable of making that decision. She can't let go. She can't let go of her mother. But at this point in the movie, at the very ending, she finally lets go. She lets go of her mother. She realizes exactly what she did, and she accepts that fact. And in order to stop causing harm to Jade, to Riley, to her family, and to her father, she throws herself out onto that road and takes her own life. And it's kind of like a self-sacrifice by the ending of this movie to help her stop causing harm to all these people. And I find this to be a very satisfying ending, because for one, you get to see her as a spirit experience all the things that have closure to all these other characters. You get to see Riley and Jade and her mother all leave the hospital. You get to see even the father survived the stab wound that he suffered throughout this movie, and he goes and he walks out of the hospital all fine. And you get to see now Mia on the opposite end of the spectrum of where she was at the beginning of the movie. She is now the spirit that is being summoned by the person that is saying, talk to me. And to once again compare this movie to Truth or Dare, you have that movie ending in a place where, you know, this Truth or Dare curse is now let out to the rest of the world, and it's a very cheesy type of ending. In this one, yes, the hand still goes on to see all these other people, but it's mirrored in a way where now the main character of this film is sadly the spirit that is going to be conjured up by the people who are going to continue this trend of holding this hand and saying, talk to me, and all these other characters, all this new cast of people are probably going to be harmed in the exact same way that Mia was harmed. It's just this cycle that is going to go through again and again and again. That feels like it's ending in a satisfying way versus a cheap way, like something like Truth or Dare did. And so yes, it does kind of have that gimmicky type of storyline with Truth or Dare that you have in horror films like that, but it has a lot more care and a lot more, I guess, intention, a lot more thoughtful take on a story like this, like something you get from an A24 movie, with also the general scares like a Truth or Dare, or like a Smile, like I mentioned at the beginning of this review, because I do think this is going to be a movie that's going to be very effective to audiences. I think people are really going to be scared by this film. At the screening that I watched at when we were walking out, I heard a couple of people saying that was a genuinely really scary movie. So I can feel a lot of people walking out of this film extremely satisfied, both at a thoughtful level and at a scare level. It's not something that's a slow burn like Hereditary that's only going to be appreciated by film lovers and film fans. It's going to be appreciated by the more general audience as well. And this is why I love horror films, because you can have these really dark and messed up stories, but also tell a very thoughtful character story with Mia and her not accepting the grief and the death of her mother, and you can have her go on a really great character journey that ends in a very dark and messed up way that also feels satisfying. That's only the type of story that you can get out of horror films, and this new revolution of horror films get us movies like Talk to Me. It gets us movies like Infinity Pool and Evil Dead Rise that we got earlier this year, and I just love horror films too much, and I think this one might be my favorites of the year so far. But if I were to have any criticisms for this movie, because honestly I don't really have any, I think this is a really tight 90-minute horror film that is just extremely effective. But if I were to pinpoint anything in this film, I guess I'd say maybe the love triangle between Jade, her boyfriend, and Mia being the ex to her boyfriend, and how there's this weird scene with Mia sucking the foot of this boyfriend character in a very absurd and very unsettling sequence that also caused a couple laughs later on in the film when they're trying to explain what happened. I didn't think this love triangle was necessary, but at the same time, it added some more character conflict. And honestly, I think Jade was a little bit too trusting in Mia by the ending of the film. I feel like at that point, with all the things that she did, with the whole distrust with her and her boyfriend, and the whole thing that she caused all this pain for Riley, she still went out to drive over to her house to listen to her, to hear her out one more time. And then she was the one who discovered the father's body bleeding out in her house, and then freaks out and then drives all the way back to the hospital. I think she was a little bit too trusting by the ending of the film to Mia, even though at that point of the film, I think I would have just cut her off so immediately. But besides that, I really don't have any real criticisms for this movie, and even that is kind of more of a nitpick. I still enjoyed all these characters, and I enjoyed the sequences that we got out of the conflict with these characters, and it just, again, it's a really effective horror film that's I don't really have too many issues with. So that's going to be my review for Talk to Me. I definitely want to hear what you guys thought of this movie down in the comments below. Let me know what your favorite scare sequence was in this entire film. Mine was easily the scene with Riley holding the hand. I thought that scene was extremely well directed. And also, I didn't mention, this movie is directed by the Raka Raka YouTube channel brothers, which is kind of insane that these YouTubers went on to make something that was genuinely terrifying and effective in a theater, which just good for them. I'm very happy for them and their inevitable success from this movie, because I think this movie, or at least I hope this movie does do well at the box office. So thanks everybody for checking out this review. Also check out in the description below, I have some links to the SAG-AFTRA kind of explanation of those strikes, as well as a place to donate for all those things. I want to support the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes, as well as still doing reviews on my channel here. And so definitely go check those out in the description below to see exactly what they mean and how you can support them as well. But that'll be it for me. Like I said, comment down below, leave a like on the video if you did enjoy it, and subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope to see you all in my next one.